so there are a few proposals that are in discussion at the moment. They're still looking for more feedback. So thank you, Jens, for submitting proposals for improving the column lineage. So we have currently 2187, which is about improving some metadata about transformation type and related to it's often privacy compliance use cases. So if you care about those, you are encouraged to comment on this. I think there's some exchange in particular between Jens and Pavel on the proposal. And the second one is also related to this in like improving the column lineage facet and making some improvements. So there's also some exchange this. So if you want to contribute to that conversation, now is the time. Another one that's at the beginning, I studied a document which is really oh yeah, I put this twice, sorry. Defining an integration certification process. So this is really early. And I think that will be a follow-up on the registry proposal we've been talking about. So right now there's a Google Doc so that, I think people like Shiri or Eric or Jens, you've all been asking for something along those lines. And so you are very welcome to contribute to this. I think thank you very much, Jens, for providing some use cases. So as you see, we are very early, right? So there are two big areas. One, validation certification for producers and for consumers and making this work better. And I'm assuming we build that on top of the registry as well, right? I can use the registry as a way to know what things have been done. So right now we're still collecting use cases, what exactly we want out of this. And so, this document is open to comments to anyone. So you can also use the suggesting mode, even if you don't have write access to add to the document. So please feel free to do that if you have opinions and add to the document, and I'll make sure to accept the contribution to this. Or if you care enough, you want to be an editor, I'm happy to make you an editor on this doc as well. So this is this, and the other thing that we started is a proposal to add dataset support in Spark Logical Nodes. So the general idea is to have an optional API we could add to those nodes so that we can push more of the dataset identification to the implementation itself. So the idea is, I think we are going to do a prototype of this soon, so that we can start like seeing, like take one of the external data sources in Spark, for example, possibly Iceberg, right, to have more metadata published in those and have ownership, avoiding having external to all those systems, how you define a unique identifier for dataset. So this is there. If you want to contribute to this or have opinion on how this works, I think Pavel is in particular has been driving some of the comments on that. And the last one, so this one for the registry proposal review. So we have been discussing on the Google Doc for a bit, and there were two main proposals that were ongoing. So I have turned that into an official proposal on Open Lineage and created, so as part of that, created a markdown file. So let me view it in actual markdown. So now what we had two options. So based on the discussions, we preferred in the community, we prefer one of the proposals. So I've written up that one in the proposal document. And I left the other one as an alternative considered, for posterity, but what's under alternative considered is the one we're not considering doing. And this is what we're proposing. So what I'm planning to do right now is to go over this one. And I think this is getting to a point where, of course, this is in a pull request. So the point is you are welcome to comment. And I think there's probably some details that need clarification. But we're getting to the point where, we are running out the details, but I think there's alignment on the overall idea of the registry. So the goal is to allow third parties to register the implementation or custom extension to make them easy to discover. And this second goal is to shorten the producer and schema URL that identify those things in the open lineage events, and making things a little less verbose thanks to the registry. So in the concept, needing a registry on the producer side, the producer would be able to register their custom facet prefix, as well as their facet schemas, right? As well as the producer URI, and keep track of what facet they actually produce, right? Declare what a producer actually produces, so you would have a source of truth of what producers do support from the open lineage spec if they don't support all of it. And link to their own documentation and so on. And okay, I have. Oh yeah, okay. So this is, sorry, I messed up this is confusing. I messed up the layout here. So consumer is going to be to the line. I'll fix this. So that's, this part is on the producer side. On the consumer side, you'll be able to point to your documentation and declare what facet you consume, and you understand, what subset of the spec you implemented and you care about, and have some way to declare that. So the requirements we define for ourselves, and in that producers and consumers should be able to evolve their custom facets and declaration of what they're doing independently, and not have to ask permission, right? Like avoid as much as we can friction on independent party to own the part of the things they register, and delegate to them maintaining this information. Right, and other requirements trying to reduce producer and facet URL fields to make them shorter. And someone can be both a producer and a consumer. You don't need two different names if you do both. So this is what we're doing. So basically the name registration, like a participant in the registry will register a name. So the name will be their own, right? So it could be Dataplex, or it could be Colibra, or it could be Airflow, or it could be various or Atlan, various things like that. And then they would own this name, and they'd be able to use in a producer, instead of a long URL, you'd be able to use that name to say, oh, this is us producing this. For example, for the Airflow custom facet, it would be produced by the Airflow project in this case. And same thing for the schema URI prefix. Instead of a long URL, you'll be able to define a shorter name, saying that this is defined by from the Airflow namespace in here. From a CI perspective, this would be hosted in the open lineage repository in a registry subfolder, and so CI would validate. So you would not be able to make changes that would be invalid. CI will enforce that the registry is self-contained and is valid and consistent. Match that custom facets are defined in a way that is consistent with their register name, that it has all the required field, that we are linking everything, and we can validate those custom facets against the examples that are being provided. So we do already this For core facets, we have a set of examples, and we validate that the schema validated them correctly. And so this would be extended to this registry. We would also publish automatically the documentation in CI. So currently, all the OpenLineage core facets get published on the OpenLineage URL, right? So basically, when you define a JSON schema, it has an ID, which is the URL you can find it at, right? And you can find actually at this URL, this schema. So this will be extended to custom facets that are registered in the registry. And we would generate, so currently we have a manually maintained ecosystem page that lists all the things that exist. And now we could start building that from a programmatically generated documentation. We can generate documentation from the JSON schema. So if we look again at the schema, it has information about description of the fields and information, so we can generate documentation from that and publish it automatically on the website. So this kind of tighten up all this definition. Right now, it's a little hard to know where the documentation for a custom facet is and where how to find information about it. And so it's about tightening, making this whole process tighter and more clear and more declarative. Additional documentation. So we have discussed use cases. So that would be in OpenLineage documentation. You can start having pages around specific use cases, for example, privacy law or privacy regulation, banking regulation, data reliability, data quality, and there are sets of facet schemas that are specifically used for some use case. For example, column lineage facets are typically for those use cases. You know, we have data quality metrics facet that are more for those use cases. And so this has been brought up in previous discussions, so we could start like grouping or tagging those custom facets for specific use cases. Now the registry itself. So the goal, based on discussion in the community, was to make a self-contained registry. That means it contains all producers, consumers, and their custom facets, and that's how you have a central place that automates publishing those schemas and publishing the documentation, and it's clear. So to make it easy to delegate maintenance for each name to people who will be owning them, right? So what we're proposing in the OpenLineage repo in the spec folder, which is already where all the core facet definitions are, we'll add a registry path. Under this registry path, there will be a folder named after this register name, right? So this could be, for people on the call, right, this could be Google Dataplex, or it could be Colibra, or it could be Atlan, or it could be the Airflow integration or Spark integration that define custom facets. There'd be a code owners file in there, so we can add the people who are reviewing and approving this, right? So basically it's kind of like committers from my name, right? Is this, and so that way we can delegate this. And if you made a new release of your product and you want to publish, what's new in the registry, what you're now certified against, you don't get blocked by a review process in there. Now, registry.json is the file under this path that will contain the metadata. And so basically, there's going to be a producer section, a consumer section. You can be both. I think there were discussions in the past, like Manta, for example, was interested in being both. Egeria is a project that is both a consumer and a producer of OpenLineage. So you put the metadata. So there's your root documentation URL and the list of facets you are producing. And as a consumer, same thing, you would have the root documentation URL to point to where is your documentation of people who care about what you're doing with those facets. And you also declare the consume facets. And then if as a producer you define custom facets, then you have a facet subfolder when you would put your custom facet schemas, and that's going to be very similar to what you find in the OpenLineage spec. So if I go back to the OpenLineage spec here, we have a facets folder, and you have all the JSON schema for the core facets. So this is general idea, right? So if we take example, I put examples here. So for example, for Airflow defines a custom facet. There will be code owners who are would be people maintaining this in the Airflow project. There'd be a registry file that would contain a producer information, point to the relevant documentation page on the Airflow website. This is just a placeholder. I didn't put the actual documentation, and it will list the produce facets. So those produce facets are either core specification facets. Okay, so the Airflow integration does publish these dataset version dataset facets, and it also publishes custom facets that it defines. And in the facet path, you would have the Airflow run facet JSON. And currently, this file is defined in the Airflow project, and so that would be a way to publish this information here. Here I was giving the example of a consumer. And so, for example, in this case, you would declare what this is where you find the documentation, and that this is where I list all the facets that I currently understand and consume. Here we go. And so then, just like the current core spec implementation, all those files would get published automatically by CI under the URL, like official URL of their JSON schema. And the way this works right now, your custom facet prefix, so it's already Airflow for this facet, but now it's declared formally somewhere. The producer URI, so what we are proposing is, instead of using a full URL for identifying the producer, now since there's a name that actually is defined, we replace the URI by a name that's defined in the OpenLineage namespace. And when you have schema URI, same thing, you don't have to put a full URL. You can just, we know it's relative to this path here, so you can just use that as a name to identify your facet. So the advantages of the solution is everything self-contained. Once you define your name, you define code owners to approve the changes to this registry and make changes. CI can guarantee that everything is consistent. The producers do need to host and maintain their own subset of registry, right? None of the people interacting with the registry have to figure out this publishing mechanism or any of that, right? Like this is all taken care of by the OpenLineage CI. And everything's automated and consistent, and we can verify this. Right, and as a cons, you have to maintain this in the OpenLineage repo, right? So that's kind of the alternative, and that's because in the alternative considered, it's a bit similar, except the registry was pointed to separate places where people maintain their custom facets. And so basically the idea was you define your name in the registry, and once you define the name and you point to your external location where you actually host what you consume, what your custom facets are, the registry was just a registry of name, right? So the delegation of how you maintain it was easy because you own where you put the schemas and where you do the things. But the downside of this, it's also more work for people who want to interact. So it prevents the CI to make sure the thing is self-consistent, because part of it is defined externally and without control of the CI to validate that it's correct. and it doesn't, so the repo cannot enforce consistency, and everybody needs to figure out how they're going to check in their own GitHub repo, or how they're going to maintain it, how they're going to do CI to publish thing, and so on. So it's more work. The advantage of this is full freedom. All you need to do is define a name, and once you define the name, you own the thing end to end, but it's less convenient for sure. So we opted for the option where you fit in the open lineage repo, which I think is fine. I think the code owners will give enough delegation so that this is not too much of a hindrance, but then we get the advantage of having consistency, like everybody does the thing the same, and there's no surprises, no things disappearing without worry. So this is where we at, and I'm sure it's not going to be set in stone, right? So that's kind of the minimum fields we're defining. I'm assuming that, I think this came up, right, as part of the certification process, like being able to say, this is that version of the open lineage spec that I'm valid with, and so on. So I'm sure we're going to add more fields to this, and things we want to declare, and but I think and I'm happy to add those now if you think it's important. But I think what we want to focus on this is the right framework, right, to keep extending this registry and making sure people are fairly independent with declaring what they're doing without, the open lineage being a bottleneck of you defining your own custom facet and so on, which is really the goal, is for you to be really flexible with this. That's it. That's the presentation for this.
I have a question. We talked before about I think about like, what if the producer produces different facets for like different kinds of things it support, like different operators in Alpha, or different lineage, logical plans in Spark.
That's a good question. My personal stance on this is we don't necessarily need to go to that level of granularity, but we can leave room in the spec for more information on that, right? Like, because otherwise it can be very granular, right? I don't think we should make, I don't know how granular we would be, right? Like, for example, another conversation is the same thing, right? Is the name you register, for example, if you're Google, is the name you register, is it Google, or is it Google Dataplex and then Google Dataproc and then Google Cloud Composer? It's probably the later. So there's going to be discussion on the granularity as well. So yeah, I think we can define this in terms of maybe, for example, right, to your point, Mache, this should not just be an array of URI, it would be an array of objects, so that we can be more precise on this, for example. That way you can have the URI and other things. Sherry, you had a question.
Yes. And this may have just been part of what you were just saying, but it would be interesting for example, for consumed facets, is it a mandatory or an optional consumption?
Yes, I think a lot of things, this would be, so you would want to be able to capture that. I think it's always going to be optional. Maybe you may want to, there's something of declaring that certain functionality is not going to be working if you don't publish this facet, right? I think in a lot of cases, the way open lineage works, most facets are option, right? Most of things are optional because, like, the level of instrumentation is variable depending on each systems, right? And the difficulty of getting some information is also variable depending if people have opaque code versus something that's more like explicit, like SQL. And so it's hard to make a facet mandatory, right?
Right, because I'm just thinking now of the case of like if something is aborted, you might not get some of those facets. You wouldn't get like a data volume. So then my other question is this for custom facets only, or will you also be putting core facets in here as the definition as well as the produced and consumed?
I think it would be interesting to, so right now the core facets are in spec/facets. I think it would be interesting to move them to spec/registry/core, for example. I think that would be nice, make everything consistent, everything works the same. I think it would be a good idea to do that. You notice here, I've done this. So it's kind of like here, I'm kind of implying there's a core name that's described. I think this is a great point.
Right, and I like that you also put versioning in. I had put a comment in the document, just during this meeting about versioning.
Yes. Yes, I think we should do that. And by the way, I would encourage you and Maciej, your question before, like to please add it to the PR as well on the thing, so that we follow up after the meeting on those as well. Yeah, this is a great point. I think that'd be a very good idea. I'll add it to the proposal to just say the core facets are under core and they're defined here, right?
Right. And is there, I see that for the produced, I mean, were you thinking with the making it an object because you're kind of overloading the URI with like OL is open lineage and Airflow is kind of the type, and you've got Airflow run facet versus OL core version? Is that why you were thinking of doing objects? Because already there's like 4 different pieces of information.
Yes. If I make it an array of strings, then there's no room to add fields for metadata on each of those. If we make an array of object with a field that is a URI here, then there's room for adding more metadata around it, right? So to what Maciej was suggesting is this facet is only used by operator X like, for example, let's think. I think yes, some operator. I think for example, in Airflow, in the BigQuery operator, there are some custom facets that are added only in the BigQuery operator, right? Like we have some metadata related to what BigQuery exposes in the API for a query. So that'd be useful information to add there.
Great. And then is there any relationship between the URLs in the registry and URLs for tests for the facets?
Oh, the facet schema and things?
Like right now, what's under, the spec tests, right? And each facet has a folder of tests. Is that something that we either expect or even want? We might not want, the custom facets to have their tests here. It might be a lot.
I think it would be useful if we think of the certification process, right? Like the other discussion we'll have on top of this. It is useful to have examples. So I think it makes sense to me that each of those custom facets will have one example. And so we use those, right? So, okay, this one is a bit simple. But if I take this one, right? So we use those as validation to make sure we guarantee in CI that this schema validates this JSON facet. So it's a good way to verify that those JSON as well-formed and they validate examples of what we think is good. It's good for consumers to have some simple test cases, right? To validate, oh, I want examples of what this is producing to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So I think it's desirable. I mean, we can make this optional or something. I don't, you know, I'm not saying we put all of unit tests of everything people do on the.
Sure, but I think the examples can also be helpful, right? If I'm discovering, right, if I'm doing self-service discovery and be like, oh, what custom facets already exist, and I'm clicking through and I'm like, oh, I don't understand what data quality metrics means, right? Like, you know, let me see. And so I was more referring to like, you know, do we want it? Do we not want it? Which it sounds like we might want it, which is, you know, again, a recommendation, not a requirement. But also like here it's in main spec tests facet name. Is that what we want, everything in tests, or is it going to be something where we have like, you know, tests airflow, tests OL, tests?
Maybe we put it in the registry itself. So that's a good point. So Alad, please comment on the proposal, and I think to me it makes sense that it's inside that same registry, right? It's part of there, or yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, it makes sense. You know, it makes sense to me.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that I'll add it to the PR.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm taking some notes on the side as well. But this is recorded anyway, so we'll be able to get back to this conversation and make sure everything that's been raised has been addressed. Any other comments? Well, thank you. This is great feedback. I think, and of course, you know, like this is not speak now or forever hold your peace, frankly. This is not getting merged tomorrow, so please feel free to go back or share with others you think would have feedback on this, and we can finalize this. But the goal is to get in this finalization, right? And we are like clarifying the details, adding the things, right, and doing the things.